Here's something that might surprise you, at least it surprised me. Around 1500 years ago, much of Yemen was technically Jewish, not just a small minority scattered in a few villages, but a kingdom ruled by Jewish monarchs where Judaism held the official backing of the crown. For a brief moment in history, Yemen could be seen as a Jewish majority land. One could even argue that it could have been chosen as the place for a new Jewish state after the end of World War II. But fast forward to today, and that same land has only a handful of Jews left. Some say 5, some say just a single one. How does a story swing so drastically from kings and kingdoms to near extinction? That is what we are going to find out in this video. The story of Yemen's Jewish people stretches back to ancient times. As early as the 2nd century BC, Jewish traders and migrants are thought to have made their way down the Arabian Peninsula all the way from further north. Some came by land following the incense routes from Palestine through Arabia. Others likely came by sea, sailing across the Red Sea from the Horn of Africa. The Himyarite kingdom, which ruled much of southern Arabia, left inscriptions in South Arabian script that reference the life of those Jewish people. Archaeologists have uncovered texts that refer to synagogues and the Jewish God. By late antiquity, Judaism was no longer just a foreign implant in Yemen. It was a faith that was embedded in the cultural fabric of the region, with a significant part of the population following it. And then came one of the most remarkable turning points in religious history. In the late 4th or early 5th century, a Himyarite king named Abu Karib Azad converted to Judaism. The reason why is a little bit of a question mark. During medieval times, rulers often converted to another religion for some type of interest. They wanted an alliance with a nearby kingdom, or maybe it was just a personal interest of the monarch himself. Here, we don't really know why. But when kings converted in those times, they didn't convert alone. The court, the nobility, the armies, and large segments of the population followed. In effect, Yemen became a Jewish kingdom. Inscriptions from this period invoke the Jewish God again. Synagogues were constructed, Jewish law was applied in the affairs of state. For perhaps the only time in history outside of Judea and Palestine, a sovereign kingdom adopted Judaism as its official religion. And a generation later, another Himyarite ruler named Yusuf Azar Yathar, more commonly known as Dhu Nuwas, cemented this legacy. He didn't just practice Judaism privately, he actively fought in the name of the religion. Around 523, he launched a campaign against the Christian community of Najran, demanding that they convert or leave. To his supporters, he was a champion of this faith, standing against the approach of Byzantium and also Aksumite Christianity from Ethiopia. To his enemies, I guess he was seen as a fanatic, but whatever the perspective, this period marks the moment when Yemen was most visibly and most explicitly Jewish. But the moment was pretty short-lived. That neighboring Christian kingdom of Aksum, based in modern-day Ethiopia, invaded Yemen in response to Dhu Nuwas' actions. Supported by Byzantine allies, they overthrew the Himyarite dynasty, ending the Jewish monarchy. From then on, Judaism in Yemen returned to being a minority faith practiced by local communities who would now live under new masters. And interestingly, they were actually ruled by Christians for a while. Contrasting again with the complete Muslim majority that lives there now, Christians there today are 0.06% of the population, almost as irrelevant as Judaism. The old Jews that had once been kings of the region now had to live under another empire, another kingdom, and rulers of another religion. And this was a struggle that would last more than 1,000 years. So how did life change for Jews in Yemen once their kingdom was gone? For centuries, they endured a pattern that is pretty familiar to Jews in many lands. Tolerated at times, persecuted at others. With the rise of Islam in the 7th century, Yemen fell under Muslim rule, and it stayed like that ever since. Jews became known as dhimmis, people of the book. who were granted a degree of protection, but only in exchange for accepting a sort of second-class citizen status. They paid the jizya tax charged to non-Muslims. The Ottoman Empire did this a lot when they ruled regions in the Balkans. It was a way of encouraging conversion, or worst case scenario, make more money. Those who didn't convert here in Yemen were also excluded from certain professions, and they were restricted in clothing, housing, social standing. These laws weren't unique to Yemen, but in the Zaidi Shia context of northern Yemen, which was a specific branch of Islam in the region, they were enforced with particular severity. At times, that persecution went beyond taxation, or I guess what you could call social humiliation. One of the darkest episodes was the Mauza exile in 1679, when Imam al-Mahdi Ahmad ordered the expulsion of nearly all Jews from their homes to the desolate region of Mauza on the Red Sea coast. The exile was catastrophic. Families were forced to march across harsh terrain. Thousands died on the way from hunger and disease, and entire communities were uprooted. Although many were eventually allowed to return, the trauma of it lived on in those Jewish people's memories for centuries to come. And even outside of dramatic episodes like this, life was pretty precarious for them. The Orphans Decree, for example, dictated that if a Jewish father died, his children had to be taken and raised as Muslims. Imagine the fear that this sowed, a community where the death of a parent meant not just personal loss, but the end of one's lineage from their religion. It's no wonder that these Yemeni Jews developed a really strong connection to their religious traditions, because they were sort of anchors for them in this really hostile environment. Yet, despite those hardships, the Jewish community of Yemen not only survived, but kind of thrived in its own way. They became craftsmen, especially silversmiths, jewelers, and carpenters. They cultivated a distinct religious tradition which preserved ancient forms of Hebrew pronunciation and maintained the practice of chanting Torah with the Targum, which is the Aramaic translation after each verse, differentiating themselves from Jews elsewhere as well. Isolated from the outside world, they kind of developed their own liturgical and religious identity. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Jewish population of Yemen still numbered in the tens of thousands, forming a vibrant, although still vulnerable, minority. For centuries, Jews here endured a pretty fragile existence, but with the modern era, new winds began to blow, and there were winds that would carry them out of Yemen altogether, kind of literally. Now guys, this is a little bit of a more niche video, and in these videos it really makes a difference to have the help of a sponsor to make it possible. So that brings us to the sponsor of this video, Ekster. Guys, Ekster has the coolest and best wallets and bags in the world. They are #1 worldwide, and they have over 1 million satisfied customers. They were nice enough to send over some of their products for me to use, and I gotta say that I don't think I'll ever go back to other wallets after this. Their card holder especially is fantastic. I mean, look at the way these cards slide up when you need to use them. If you like a more traditional look, they have got you covered too, with these other open and shut wallets that offer extra slots, as well as a place for your bills. On top of everything, they have an incredible tracker card that you can sync to your phone. You put it in your wallet and make sure that you're able to track it at any time. If you forgot your wallet somewhere, the card will tell you where. If you left it at home when leaving on a rush, it'll notify you so you can go back for it. And even if you're just at home and you can't find it, you can have it ring from up to 300 feet away. So if you want to try using the coolest wallets ever, go to partner.ekster.com/general knowledge and use the code knowledge at checkout to get an extra 10% off and up to 35% off with their fall sale. Thank you to them for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to it. By the late 19th century, new forces were reshaping their destiny. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 and the expansion of global trade routes connected Yemen more closely to the outside world. At the same time, Jews everywhere, including those in Yemen, were starting to dream about returning to Palestine. Beginning in 1881, small waves of immigration began. Families trekked across deserts, or they sailed from Aden towards Ottoman and later British-controlled Palestine. The journey was pretty difficult, but for many, it was a fulfillment of long-held hopes. Then came the 20th century. In 1947, amid the turmoil surrounding the end of the British Mandate and the creation of an Israeli state in Palestine, anti-Jewish riots erupted in Aden and all across Yemen. Homes and shops were destroyed, dozens of people were killed, and the sense of security collapsed as little as it existed before. And when Israel declared independence in 1948, the pressure only grew. Jews in Yemen were increasingly seen as suspect, vulnerable to violence, and completely unprotected by the state. But in 1949, Imam Ahmad of Yemen issued a surprising decree. Well, not so much surprising in what it intended to cause, but surprising in the way that it allowed it to happen. By his order, Jews could leave the country. What followed was one of the most dramatic exoduses in modern Jewish history. Israel, working with the British and the Americans, launched Operation Magic Carpet, also known as Operation on Wings of Eagles. Between June 1949 and September 1950, nearly 45,000 Yemenite Jews were airlifted to Israel and Palestine on around 380 flights. Many of these had never seen an airplane before. Some believed they were literally fulfilling the prophecy of being carried on eagle's wings back to Zion. In less than 2 years, an entire community of ancient people were uprooted and transplanted. Villages that had known Jewish life for centuries suddenly stood completely empty. And this might sound like the end of a story, but it wasn't. A remnant of people stayed behind, and their fate would take the story of Yemen's Jews into darker and more uncertain times, creating a huge contrast with what once was. Because not everyone left, some remained either unwilling or unable to depart. Over the following decades, that remnant shrank further. Some stayed in the north, others in towns like Raida and Sana. By the 60s and 70s, the Jewish presence in Yemen was a shadow of what it had been, but still a couple of thousand clung on. The 21st century, however, brought new dangers. In 2008, a Jewish man named Moshe Yaish al-Nahari was attacked in broad daylight after refusing demands to convert to Islam. He didn't survive, and this sent a pretty chilling message to the already tiny community. As Yemen descended into civil war in 2015, the situation grew even worse. The rise of Houthis placed Jews in even greater jeopardy, especially due to the hostilities that exist between them and the government of Israel. In 2016, 19 Jews were secretly evacuated to Israel and Palestine in a covert mission, including the family of a community leader. One man, however, has come to symbolize the plight of the last Jews in Yemen. Some say he's literally the only one left. His name is Levi Salem Musa Marhabi, born in the late 1980s. He was arrested by Houthi authorities in 2016, accused of helping smuggle a centuries-old Torah scroll out of the country. Despite orders for his release, he's remained in prison for years. Reports describe him as being subjected to solitary confinement and pretty deteriorating health. He's become a symbol of a community that was reduced to its final fragile threads. Today, sources disagree on exactly how many Jewish people remain in Yemen, but it seems to range between 1 and 5, which, as you can imagine, is very, very little compared to what it used to be. Yet, while the last chapter inside Yemen may be closing, the story of Yemenite Jews continues elsewhere. It's similar to how Jewish people were expelled from Portugal and Spain in medieval, or I guess a little later, and their culture continued elsewhere in Europe, namely in the Netherlands, for instance. While the physical presence of Jews in Yemen has nearly vanished, their legacy hasn't. In Israel and Palestine, the descendants of them number in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps over 400,000 today. They brought with them their traditions, their liturgy, their cuisine, their music. Yemenite chanting styles enriched local religious practices. Foods like yaknun and malawak became loved staples, and singers of Yemenite origin such as Ofra Haza introduced elements of their heritage to their audiences. Yemenite jewelry, embroidery, and poetry live on far from the land where they first flourished. Thank you so much for watching this video. I have a great one coming next week. It was the first time that I traveled somewhere and filmed on location about a topic, so if you want to catch that video, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications. Thank you so much to my patrons for their support. Thank you for watching again, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.